Ukraine suffers heavy weapon losses, sometimes forced to temporarily halt counterattacks. The New York Times reported statements from several U.S. and European officials, stating that during the first 2 weeks of the counterattack, approximately 20% of Ukraine's deployed weapons were destroyed or damaged. The damage, as reported by the New York Times on July 15, includes a number of Western-supplied tanks and armored personnel carriers, the combat weapons that Ukraine hoped would help them confront Russian forces. According to some U.S. and European officials, the weapon loss rate for Ukraine decreased to 10% in the following weeks. This achievement is partly due to Kiev changing its tactics, focusing more on attacking Russian forces with long-range artillery and missiles, rather than charging into minefields and facing the firepower of the Russian army as before. Although this signal seems positive to Ukraine, there are still harsh realities. The losses in the subsequent phase for Ukraine are not significant, partly because its counterattack has slowed down and even temporarily halted in some areas, as Ukrainian soldiers have to face the formidable defense system of the Russian army. The New York Times reported that despite suffering losses, the Ukrainian army has made only a small advancement, 1/12 of the expected progress, to reach the southern coastal region and divide the Russian forces there. In an interview this week, a Ukrainian soldier stated that unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, from their unit captured footage of 6 Western-supplied armored vehicles being caught in artillery fire in the southern town of Velika Novosilka, Ukraine. They were all completely burned, said Sergeant Igor, the soldier claimed. According to the U.S. newspaper, Russia had several months to prepare for Ukraine's counterattack. Mined front lines, tank traps, tunnels, as well as continuous appearances of UAVs and attack helicopters from Russia, have become increasingly frequent. With the above preparations, experts believe it is not surprising that Ukraine has suffered relatively severe losses in the initial phase of the counterattack. This week, President Zelensky admitted that the counterattack had to be temporarily halted for a few weeks, attributing the cause to the lack of equipment and ammunition. He also called on Western allies to expedite the delivery of equipment and weapons. U.S. officials also acknowledged that Ukraine's counterattack had been temporarily halted but stated that Ukrainian forces have resumed operations with caution, paying attention to avoiding minefields and casualties. U.S. officials believe that with the receipt of bombs and cluster munitions from Washington, the speed of the counterattack may increase. On July 12, UK Defense Secretary Ben Wallace said, "The counterattack is not too fast but not too slow compared to the expected progress. The Ukrainian military is doing what any army would do when faced with Russian defense minefields." According to the New York Times, some U.S. provided Bradley infantry fighting vehicles performed well when crossing Russian minefields. However, there have also been many cases where Bradley vehicles were severely damaged and immobilized by explosions before reaching the Russian defense line. Military experts have long said that the first 24 kilometers of the counterattack would be the most difficult because the attacking side usually needs 3 times the strength, whether in terms of weapons, personnel, or both, compared to the defending side. Valery Zaluzhny, a top Ukrainian military general, expressed disappointment that Ukraine is fighting without receiving F-16 fighter jets from the West. This makes the Ukrainian military vulnerable to attacks from Russian helicopters and artillery, added General Zaluzhny. According to RT, since the beginning of June, the Ukrainian army has conducted a series of offensives along the front line from Kherson to Donetsk. Advancing through minefields without air support, the Ukrainian military suffered 26,000 casualties and lost over 3,000 military equipment, as stated by the Russian Ministry of Defense. Ukraine has not commented on these figures. RT also quoted President Putin stating that Russian forces have destroyed a total of 311 Ukrainian tanks since June 4. "I believe that at least 1/3 of the destroyed tanks are from the West, including Leopard tanks," Putin said in an interview with Russian media on July 13. According to the New York Times, the 47th Mechanized Brigade of Ukraine, one of the 3 units equipped and trained by the West, has lost 30% of its 99 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles. The 33rd Mechanized Brigade also lost nearly 1/3 of its 32 Leopard tanks. Kiev has not commented on these figures reported by the U.S. newspaper.